Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast Livestream 59, reason to wag your tail and point your snout in the air. Mm-hmm. All right, it's Q&A time.
It's Q&A time. Here we go. We'll begin with a few questions from last time, as we do. Have you guys riffed on jealousy, the emotion, through the evolutionary lens? If so, I'll look for that. Thanks for all you've done in 2020.
I'm not sure if we have riffed on it specifically. Let's say a little here and we can come back to it.
All right.
So first of all, jealousy, like so many things, is an adaptation, right? Yeah. All negative emotions would have to be. How else would they have come into existence? Now, jealousy obviously has implications. You know, if we take sexual jealousy, for example, it has a role to play in maintaining a pair bond, right? That is to say, policing your pair bond such that it does not come apart on you or get parasitized or whatever it is obviously an important thing to do, to the extent that pair bonds are also an adaptation. Hey, that's more cats than usual. So anyway, there's that.
We might have an infestation.
We have something close to an infestation. So the only other thing I would say is that it's fascinating and not surprising that because male and female are real phenomena.
Whoa.
I know, real phenomena. And because male and female, not only are they real, but they're different, that the sexual jealousy is distinct between males and females in a predictable way, because that is to say that the things that threaten a male and a female are distinct. So we could
historically have been reliably throughout history, and slightly less distinct now in the modern era, but still the patterns of jealousy across sex hold.
Right, they hold, and so let's say generally, males have a lot to lose, evolutionarily speaking, if they end up investing in offspring that are not genetically theirs. Now, it may be that we shouldn't give a damn about this, because who the hell cares about whether or not your children have your genetic spellings for their enzymes or not? But we are wired to care about it, because those of us who were more wired to care about it outcompeted those of us who were less wired to care about it. So males, and by the way, this is a feature that females carry but do not express. That is to say, we all have the human genes with very few exceptions. There are some Y chromosomes things that women don't have, but in general, women have all the same genes trying to get into the future, and so they express those that match the womanly interaction with the universe, and they have latent the ones that match a male pattern. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, men tend to be very concerned about sexual infidelity. Women have less to lose in sexual infidelity, not zero. Sexual infidelity can result in the loss of a mate to somebody else, so there's reason to be somewhat jealous over it. It can result in disease or other things, so there are reasons that women should try to police the sexual behavior of their mates, but not as strongly as males. What females, at least in humans, have to fear especially is abandonment, because to the extent that raising offspring is an extremely expensive behavior, signing up with a male to jointly raise children and then having him disappear, which then makes that female much less able, in traditional terms, to find a new mate because she's got a burden that doesn't carry the genes of whoever the new mate would be, means that this is a very serious matter. So, in general, men tend to be more sexually jealous, and females tend to be more romantically jealous. And
so men tend to be more concerned about controlling physical infidelity, and women tend to be more concerned about controlling emotional infidelity.
Yep, that's correct. All right, so I think that's a good
summary
primer on sexual jealousy, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other kinds.
Just in time for us to lose all of our carnivorans.
Oh man,
this from last week. Are Biden's recent appointments visual or merit based? Curious if Evergreen writ large relates at all. Also, Unity 2020, you were right all along.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have specific things to say on?
No, I mean, I like this question enough that I brought it back up for this time. But it feels like the prediction that we were making, that he was going to pander, and it's impossible. I mean, this is the problem with tokenism and things like affirmative action is that what if what if the most qualified person for a job is in fact a disabled Black woman? You hire a disabled Black woman in this environment, and it is going to be nearly impossible for anyone's first, second, or even third interaction with them to assume, oh, wow, what an awesome person for this job. Because of the culture that we're in, it's impossible to know, and the person themselves must recognize that all of their interactions are tainted with this.
Yeah. And we learned this in the affirmative action era, right? So this is a new version of it, but we're reinventing the same problem.
Yeah.
So I see very little that's hopeful in Biden's appointments. I see a lot of pandering. I see a lot of machine politics reasserting itself after what may one day be understood as a refreshing break in the form of insanity that made no sense. But
it wasn't same old, same old.
Yeah, it was, I must say, I know I'm just going to take crap for this because I always do anytime I indicate any sort of ambiguity about which the right side is when they're both wrong. But, I said when Trump was elected that at least we were all awake, right? At least we were all awake.
You did.
And that the thing that I feared if Clinton had won in 2016. Yeah,
you talked me off the ledge. I mean, metaphorically.
I did, and onto a different ledge, but it's all ledges. But the fact was, there was every danger that if Clinton had won in 2016, that a whole lot of people were going to feel like she's not perfect, but it's good enough. And those of us who regard it as not nearly good enough and very much a matter of an intense kind of political corruption that, yes, may very frequently be legal, but why would you care about that? Right. The fact that the corruption is legal is its own problem. It does not make it better.
Yeah.
Right. So what we had was a break in the narrative, and the narrative is now reasserting itself, and you can see it reasserting itself in Biden's appointments and statements. And a lot of people who saw nothing but the horror of Trump for 4 years are suddenly going to feel like, whatever. Okay, it is what it is. It is what it always is. And the answer is, that thing that it always is going to get us killed. So try not relaxing about it,
There you go. Have you read any Haruki Murakami? He is wonderful and loves to play with our conceptions of reality. Worth reading. Thank you both, and happy holidays. I have not, but I wanted to include this question because one of our most amazing students on our last study abroad trip was constantly recommending Murakami to me, and I still have not read any of his work, but I have received this recommendation from a number of sources, so will do so. And if anyone has a particular recommendation for where to start, I would be interested to hear it.
Cool.
How does the rate of mutation affect the? And I presume your answer to that question is no.
Yes, I have not.
Yeah. How does the rate of mutation affect the evolutionary process? Can a species' mutation rate be considered fine-tuned for the species for optimal evolution?
Good question. It has a huge implication, and the answer is even better than you're anticipating here. So there you have rates of evolution that are highly variable. HIV eluded our initial ability to do anything about it because it was so rapidly evolving. Likewise, things like cold and flu are so rapidly evolving that, even if we can make some inroads against flu, for example, they're not durable. So in that case, high mutation rate, which has a cost, right? A lot of the mutations that occur, in fact, the expectation would be the vast majority of them make things worse, but to the extent that it discovers some new thing, you can afford a lot of dead viruses if you come up with some new innovation that advances the ball.
Or evades an extant vaccine, for instance.
Right, evades an extant vaccine, or escapes the memory cells that.
Either endogenous or exogenous, our built-in, our onboard immunity, or one that we've received via a shot.
Right. But here's where this gets really interesting, which is even within a creature, the mutation rate is not one thing, and there is clear evidence that different properties are moved around in the genome and altered with respect to their rate of mutation. So you have certain things like, in fact, the adaptive immunity we talked about is contingent on a kind of genetic shuffling that takes place So basically, there's a random number generator-ish
Oh, yeah.
phenomenon in the genome. There is also the ability to move things on chromosomes where they are more and less prone to be disrupted and therefore to change in ways that could be selected. So, for example,
Like closer to the chiasma, more and less susceptible to crossing over.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
So I learned from Bill Rice, who we mentioned on the program last time, that the fastest evolving gene known at the time, and I don't know that it's changed, the creature may have changed, but the likely the process has not. The fastest evolving gene known was the gene for the acrosomal proteins in, I think it was abalone, if I recall correctly, in the sperm. And the idea is that there's a...
Right, so the acrosomal proteins are, is it tail proteins or is that like the coating?
No, it's the protein that enters the egg.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
There's a kind of arms race between males. The one that activates the egg first has an advantage, obviously, because it shuts down the egg's availability to other sperm. So where there's sperm competition, there's intense selection for a better formula. And it may be that this is part of an arms race where there's actually resistance on the part of the substrate. There's evolutionary resistance on the part of the egg. And so anyway, rapidly evolving proteins in the acrosomal proteins in sperm. Slowest evolving genes known are those for histone proteins.
Yeah.
Histone proteins being proteins around which DNA is wrapped, partially just to keep it organized so it isn't a huge tangle that breaks up and can't function. But we have learned more recently that the way in which proteins are wrapped around, the way in which DNA is wrapped around these histone proteins, which look like rods and balls, and they're packed in a very regular form. In fact, you can see it in an electron micrograph. You can see, you see these, I forget what they're called, nucleosomes. But anyway, you see these regular balls that are created by the way that the DNA is wrapped, and then there's sort of a fractal process where it's wrapped, and then it's wrapped at a higher level and higher level. But anyway, the way in which the genes are wrapped around the histone proteins dictates whether or not they are available for transcription. And so what this means is that this is a mechanism for turning genes on and off. So if you think about the fact that your eye has all the proteins necessary to make your liver work, but most of those aren't useful in your eye, so they have to be silent. So you can wrap genes in such a way that they are effectively invisible to the cell and not interfering with anything. They're dormant. So the point is, in histone proteins, these are extremely ancient structures. They go back to the beginning of eukaryotes, which you labeled as how far back year-wise?
1.2 to 2 billion years.
1.2 to 2 billion years. That's a very ancient structure. And the idea is any alteration you would make to a histone protein is almost certain to be catastrophic, and not just catastrophic for some process, but catastrophic across the whole genome, because everything is dependent on being well wrapped and organized. So anyway, very slowly evolving. So
yeah, lowest mutation rate there.
Yep.
Very cool. The next one, we have not yet gotten to these kayaking and existential threats piece. I took a real quick look at it and want to spend a little more time, but we will come back to it. Chadwick, thank you. Would you consider mirroring your content to alternative platforms such as Minds or Rumble?
Sure. I think mirroring would be smart in light of the various hazards that clearly go with these big platforms. So yes, it would be a good idea.
Okay. Question from the Discord conversation this week. What would be the evolutionary logic behind self-imposed celibacy, as seen in clergymen, hermits, and philosophers throughout history?
Gonna have to put this one on pause, except to say that
I thought you were going to say.
The fact is there are lots of ways that things that cannot reproduce end up doing the equivalent, and so
that's good.
Yeah. It's an important principle. And so the counterintuitive thing is that it's like people, and but we will come back to it in proper form with an excellent, long, I think satisfying explanation. And anyway, I'm looking forward to doing that. And if it turns out that this lockdown stuff is going to go on and on and on. Maybe we have to do it some way other than renting a hall, but it has been my hope that we would rent a hall and have the discussion.
Okay, first question from this last hour. Why did you describe the success of the new AlphaFold 2 as scary? So we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I thought we sort of explored it in our conversation. I find it more terrifying than you do, and you had a more tempered response.
Remind me of where we were in that discussion.
AlphaFold 2 is the Google solution, the AI solution to protein folding.
Right.
And this came in this hour, and I felt obliged to read the question, but I'm not sure. I feel like we sort of had the conversation. I don't have anything to add because I have not been thinking about this anymore for a couple of weeks.
So I think I can recover it. And I would say my expectation was that there is actually a simple logic underlying the way proteins fold, something that is effectively explored closer to what Legos are like than building stuff from the ground up at a molecular level.
That's right.
And so my hope, I guess, is that what the program did was intuit something about the heuristics that go into exploring this space. And therefore, that basically this is hinting at a discovery we might be about to have, but it does not imply that the awesome power of artificial intelligence is right there and we are standing at the singularity and etc.
Yeah, I guess, regardless of, certainly it's less scary the closer to true that is. The less complex this question actually was that has just been solved by AI and is less terrifying. But really, whatever the bounds on that range of possibilities are, the fact is I don't see any evidence that anyone thinking in this space with power to do anything about it is seeing what they're creating as an evolutionary process itself, into which checks and balances must be put, as selection would be putting on organisms, such that a human being could override a runaway process that happened.
Yeah,
I don't see any evidence that's happening. So that's why sort of any AI gains in kind of any space I find a bit terrifying, because I see no parallel conversation around where's the kill switch.
Yeah,
I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm just missing it. I'm not aware of it. This is not a literature conversation I pay attention to, but I don't know of it if it's there.
Well, I think there's a lot of thinking around runaway AI and what might be done about it, but so far it's in the context of libertarian solutions, which are too voluntary to be workable. So I guess what I would say is it is time that we started taking all of these things like, okay, you've got CRISPR-Cas9. Is this the end of the world? It's not the end of the world, right? We got a typewriter for genes. We don't have the Rosetta Stone, but the Rosetta Stone is coming. Mm-hmm. It will. At that point, CRISPR-Cas9 becomes a much more frightening phenomenon. Yeah. Okay, you've got AlphaFold 2. Does that mean that we're about to be able to design proteins to do whatever we want, and we're be molecularly interfering with the world in a way we can't undo? Not yet, but it's coming, right? So, likewise, gain of function mutation research, right? Is COVID-19 the product of such thing? Could well be. But even if it's not, it could happen. So it's time that we get used to the idea that our power is now so great that we're going to be, we're going to Fermi paradox ourselves out of existence if we don't get wise really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. And so each one of these things.
And stop. We need the best brains on every possible topic. So this is not the moment to be virtue signaling around immutable characteristics.
Yeah, right. We're going backwards. Yeah. So yes, I think that's the point. We got to stop going backwards. It's time to start going forwards at a rate that is conceivably fast enough to catch up to the dangers we're creating. Yeah. And those who would have us going backwards are a threat to the endeavor, very clearly.
Mm-hmm. And many of them aren't contributing anything good.
True.
I work in tech as an artist. This ideology infects even scholarships. I saw women in game scholarship evolve over the years from being for women to I don't even know how to pronounce this, WOMXN, to WOMXN, trans and non-binary. I can't help but feel like I'm alone in my field when believing in meritocracy. Yeah. So there's no question there, but a comment, and I feel you. It's yes.
It's going to be everything until we get over the idea that it should be everywhere, that it's always good to behave this way.
Yeah. So this one, I kind of remember the question, but I don't remember us. Anyway, didn't really get an answer to my question from last time about how people can stop giving away their power. Could you please share your thoughts? Also, do you have a P.O. box for people to send holiday cards and gifts? So I'm going to look up the P.O. box while you answer the question.
The question is, how can you not give up your power? I guess I wish I understood which version of give up your power.
Yeah, I think we answered some version that wasn't what this person wanted, and we still don't necessarily know what is being asked for.
I mean, I'm going to give you a placeholder answer since we don't know exactly what domain you're talking about. But there's something to be said for advertising, for, first of all, cultivating your ability to be trustworthy with power, right? And when you demonstrate trustworthiness with power, people are much more likely not to see your having power as a problem and to go about tearing it down. So I would say this is something that worked very well for us inside the classroom, where we knew our students and they knew us.
Yep.
Which was, we demonstrated that we would do the right thing. If we got something wrong, we would come into class and explain where the error was and upgrade things. And so as people got the sense that A, you did care about them, B, that you were honorable and not lying to yourself, they were much more relaxed about the power dynamic. Whereas, otherwise there is an asymmetry, which in the wrong hands can be abused. So
I actually talked about that in my impact theory conversation with Tom Bilyeu. So that's out, and I actually did listen to it, which I don't always listen to these conversations afterwards, but I recommend it. There's some stuff in there about power and how you can use power effectively, if you're interested in pursuing more impact theory.
Impact theory podcast, is that the name?
I think so. It's definitely impact theory. It's on all the podcasts, and it's also on YouTube, I guess. So we do have P.O. Box, one for flat stuff and one for packages. P.O. Box 1703, Lake Grove, Oregon 97035-3401. Either of our names on it. Or for things that are more three-dimensional, 15875 Boones Ferry Road, number 1703. And then same everything else, Lake Grove, Oregon 97035-3401. All right. Have you read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep? It offers some alarming and compelling evidence for the ways modernity has devastated our sleep and by extension our health. Yes, it's terrific. In our forthcoming book, which is still months from publication, but will be published in 2021, we have recommended further readings for each of our chapters. And for our chapter on sleep, it is exactly Walker's book that we recommend as further reading. And of course, there's lots of other places you could go, but it really is terrific. So, anyone who's interested in a savvy, careful, nuanced understanding of sleep, I recommend it. Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep. I lived in LA for 3 years, so I must ask, how did two people who grew up in Los Angeles end up normal and reasonable adults?
Oh, well, we fled. That's what we did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I have I have a greater fondness for LA than I once did. I had no patience for it growing up, or in the decades after leaving. But I now understand the value of a weather pattern that allows you to spend a lot of time outside, even in the winter. I mean, I remember as a kid, I remember at one point my parents were very concerned, and they confronted me and asked me to tell them what order the seasons came in.
And you couldn't do it.
I struggled with it because, wasn't that obvious.
Meanwhile, one of the struggles in my house is that my mom, who grew up in the Midwest, in the South, always wanted me to be wearing socks. And I hated socks. I really preferred to be barefoot. And my sense was, it's LA. Why do I need socks?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder about these people who think you should always wear socks. Like, they don't shower? I mean...
You're going to hear about that from my mother who watches these,
Probably will hear about that from your mother. But Jesse, if you're watching, don't wear the socks in the shower. It doesn't end well.
I think she knows this.
Probably.
Yeah.
She's a very sensible woman. Yes. Undoubtedly, she does know.
I feel the same way. I had very little patience. I mean, I actually did enjoy part of LA growing up, and then as I came of age, as I became a woman, it struck me as a ridiculous place to live, especially for a young woman. And I was so eager not to be there and couldn't imagine ever wanting to go back. But it was one of the places that we considered moving when we knew we were moving from Olympia, right? Like we actually really did think about it.
That isn't saying very much because we considered moving just about everywhere.
I don't think that's true, but I mean, but LA, like most places, was just frankly too expensive,
unaffordable.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a particular kind of crazy that is in the mindset of a lot of, especially people on the West Side in LA. And I grew up on the West Side. You did not, but I don't think where you grew up is considered the West Side. I don't know.
I don't know either. I grew up near the tar pits.
Yeah, not in the tar pits.
No, and we called it the pits.
No, you didn't.
No
one ever called
but
it
I'm
that.
Thinking.
Your neighborhood? No. No, didn't happen.
No.
Okay. While the sound check may no longer be necessary, I always enjoyed the ritual and humor that came with it. I miss it now that it's gone. Bring it back as a short, lighthearted bit before the heavier subjects of the show.
All right, but we need a new reason for its existence as the tech has become reliable. So I don't know. We'll find something.
Okay. TJ said, this is going to be Thomas Jefferson said Constitution should be rewritten every 19 years. Jordan Hall has discussed a Jubilee system wherein reboots occur every 50 years to prevent capture and collapse. Do you have thoughts on systematized civilizational reboots or formalizing the cycles? We were just working on this.
Yeah.
The final chapter of our book.
We definitely do have similar ideas. Some of them are not completely independent. But yes, there is something about the fact of a static target being gamed, and there is something to the idea of a self-refreshing process. The devil, however, is in the details, because for one thing, if you decide fresh sheet of paper, then you're going to make new mistakes that you would have gotten over if you had continued some things. So there has to be some mechanism for sort of intentionally carrying things over. There has to be some rubric for dealing with the Chesterton's fence problem. Mm-hmm. There has to be something precautionary. And yes, I know every time you say precautionary principle, there's a whole group of people who start clutching their pearls and looking for their fainting couch and
asking for the smelling salts.
Mm-hmm. And the fact is, precautionary principle is difficult to implement, but it is vitally important that we figure out how to take the spirit of the precautionary principle and install it into the system. But yeah.
And you know what? We're a smart species. We should be able to figure this out.
As species go, we're smart-ish.
That's all you're going to give me.
That's all I'm going to give you.
Okay.
Here's the thing. We have the potential, being so software-based, to become very smart, and I'm looking forward to us deciding to do that.
Bret, would you be able to share the how-to for the bike you made? Other than the bike and driving to the Amazon? Are there other things you did from first principles that were majorly rewarding? Okay, before you talk about bikes.
You can't drive to the Amazon.
You can't drive to the Amazon. There's the whole issue of the Darien Gap in Panama, through which the Pan American Highway does not go.
Right. So
for political rather than geological reasons.
You stepped on my joke.
You could still say it. I don't know what you're going to say.
No, I take it back. Okay. There was no joke.
Okay. You can't drive to the Amazon, but...
you could have your car put on a ship and you could go around the Darien Gap. But we have never driven to the Amazon. We did drive to, we got as far as Guatemala once.
From Los Angeles, yes?
Yes, we are actually technically probably fugitives in Guatemala.
I have a new passport at this point. I can now go back to Guatemala.
Oh, I have no doubt that we could get away with going to Guatemala. But technically speaking, I believe that you at least are a fugitive from justice in Guatemala for having sold a car without authorization.
To a lawyer. who gave us paperwork and then said, actually, we didn't need it at all. So it was all on the up and up until we got to the border. It's a long story, but yes, fugitive from justice.
Fugitive from
briefly,
justice. Yeah.
until I, because it had expired, it was going to expire, got my new passport, at which point I now feel free to go back to Guatemala.
All right. Well,
Yes.
we should do that. So yeah, the secret. So I'm going to tell you the embarrassing secret. It's not so embarrassing, but you want to build your own bike? And you should. It's great. And in fact, it's economically, if you were thinking of buying a custom bike for yourself, the expense of making your own bike is actually quite reasonable if you have the couple weeks to do it. But it is the United Bicycle Institute in Ashland, Oregon, a lovely little town where there's very nice biking and nice walking around in the evening and nice swimming in the reservoir and all kinds of stuff.
And when there's not COVID, one of the best Shakespeare festivals in the world.
One of the best.
Fabulous live theater, and not just Shakespeare. Super.
Yeah. So the United Bicycle Institute has a building there where they have a school. They can teach you basic mechanics, advanced mechanics. If you want to work in a bike shop and never make any money at all, you could get a advanced certificate for bike mechanic stuff, or you can take their frame building course. And you can, it does the whole thing. Probably, my guess, my feeling having done it is you should be technically inclined. They say on their site you don't need to be, but I think you wouldn't do very well if you didn't have basic, skills. You got to have good hands and a sense for how that kind of thing works, but you probably wouldn't do it if you didn't. So if you're inclined, you go there, you live there for 2 weeks. You design your bike based on your particular measurements and what you want your bike to do. You draft it, and then you build it. You get the parts and you braze them together, or if you're doing a lug frame, you solder them together. And it's really spectacular. And I will tell you that riding a bike that you've built it's like nothing else. It's a great feeling, especially if you've done anything unusual where your bike is not just like any other bike, but it has special characteristics. It's a pretty cool thing.
And your experience there was also my 40th birthday present to you.
Yes, I was going to say that. It occurred to me that I didn't say it. This was, I think, probably the greatest present I ever got.
I mean, it's not something you were unaware of. You had your eye on it.
Yeah,
you also had your eye on flight lessons, which is part of why I decided on UBI.
Wow. You never know where we'd be if I'd gotten flight lessons.
I don't. Probably somewhere else.
True. But yeah,
all right.
UBI.
Yeah, you can't go as far on a bike.
You can. It just takes longer, and well, I guess if there's water.
Yeah, you can't cross the
you
Darien
can't go
Gap
as
on a
many
bike.
Places.
You can't bike to the Amazon.
Yeah. Well, right.
Okay. Regarding meritocracy, most get spit out the bottom. Limited job opportunities for scientists, artists, etc. means there's no equality of outcome or opportunity, even with equal ambition and ability. Will AI make equality redundant?
Try that again.
Regarding meritocracy, most get spit out the bottom. There are limited job opportunities for scientists and artists, etc., which means there's no equality of outcome or opportunity, even for people with equal ability or ambition, etc. Will AI make equality redundant?
Will AI? So I'm struggling over what that last thing means.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
it
not
does
sure
mean we have to engineer a system that isn't based on the same things, because the idea that merit is the same thing as productivity is wrong, right? It at one time may have been some kind of proxy, but we're living in a very different world. And so the real question is, what would we like people to be doing? What kind of goodness would we like them to be bringing to the world? And how can we make that remunerative, right? And so, as we've said here before, it is essential that we not reach equality of outcome. That's not a desirable state. What you want is a state in which people who have brought the most value to the world, things that are truly valuable rather than just things that sell, right? You want those people rewarded at the highest rate so that we all attempt to produce things that make humanity stronger, better, happier, more fulfilled, freer, those kinds of things, right? Now, the question is there any way to do that other than architecting? In other words, the place where a traditional libertarian and we would depart from each other would be over whether or not there's something to be done by intentionally trying to structure the system rather than their correct recognition that intentionally trying to structure a system carries all kinds of hazards, and that you're actually pretty likely to screw it up if you don't have a good mode for figuring out what actually works and what the unintended consequences might be, and what you might do to mitigate them.
Yes. I don't know how to pronounce this word. I've seen it a lot. Ivermectin. It's an antiparasitic drug in use for decades. There is strong evidence for its efficacy as treatment for COVID, but it's being ignored by the mainstream media. And then he has parentheses DISC, which is your brother's acronym, which stands for the Distributed Idea Suppression Complex. Does the presence of ivermectin and the fact that there is a lot of evidence for its efficacy as a treatment for COVID not significantly alter the vaccine situation? I don't know nearly as much about ivermectin as I might. I think it does. It should be being talked about. I think the one important way, though, that effective treatment is different from vaccine is that there is real concern from across a number of different like anatomical and physiological domains that simply having had COVID may produce itself long-term effects. So even if you treat it such that the symptoms don't go so bad that you end up dying from it, with which ivermectin seems, I believe, what little I know, to be effective against. I at least have not seen any evidence suggesting that ivermectin also has the capacity to shut down any of the long-term effects. How could we know at this point? Because the thing's only been around. The whole virus has only been known maybe a year. Who knows?
Closing in on a year. Yeah. Yes, I would say I am beginning to see some very high-quality conversation about the foolishness of a single silver bullet theory of how we're going to address this. And at some level, it is certainly true that we should have been way better at generating high quality testing so that we could in fact say who does have it, who doesn't have it, with
instead of relying on PCR testing.
Right. All of the testing is bad, and it's creating a lot of problems, including it is fueling conspiracy beliefs that are not well founded because it is very hard to establish that they are false. And so, in any case, we should have had an intense lockdown followed by very high quality testing and control of the disease where there was an outbreak. Longer term measures should be much more surgical. A vaccine is great if it works, but we're running a huge dangerous experiment by trying to get everybody vaccinated, and certainly assuming that is what is the thing that gets us out of COVID is a crazy gamble. I read today something that surprised me, which is, I hope this is correct, I don't have it on the ready, but Thailand had a total, which I believe has a population of 70 million, has 60 COVID deaths total. And Thailand is not one of these authoritarian countries that did all right because they were able to order people around. So anyway,
and it's got a climate more like Guayaquil and Manaus, which have had appalling death rates.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, we could have done a lot.
Guayaquil in Ecuador, which we talked about a lot in an early episode, and Manaus in Brazilian Amazon.
Yeah. So in short, we blew it by not taking the virus seriously. By politicizing it, we have made it impossible that we could deploy a rational policy because half the population will suspect it's a trick no matter what.
And the other half of the population has decided that if you question anything about the policy at all, you're a Nazi or something.
Right. You're
an anti-vaxxer. You're a this, you're a that. You're like, and that largely from the people who claim to be all pro-science.
Right. So in effect, because we blew all of the other opportunities we had to control this, we're now in a situation where, well, these vaccines damn well better work because we've blown every opportunity to limit this in some other way. Yeah. Whereas,
but I mean, I have hope for ivermectin or ivermectin, however it's pronounced. Just with that one important caveat that it's not a one-for-one replacement for a vaccine. Vaccines and treatments are different approaches to diseases, and we have been we've been actively hoping for instance, malaria vaccine since we began travel, since that moment when I ended up on the run in Guatemala, not really, but on that very first trip that we took through Latin America, where we got all of the necessary vaccinations for tropical diseases that you don't end up with if you're just living in the U.S., but also had to take malaria prophylaxis with us. And there's not a good malaria prophylaxis out there. It all has weird side effects, and then the treatment is different. And a vaccine would simply be preferable.
Right, simply be preferable.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're possible, and sometimes they're not. And
for malaria, it seems highly elusive.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the lesson here, and actually, I think it was Jeffrey Miller who he had a tweet poll that he put out asking people if they thought that our experience with COVID would make us better next time, worse next time, or.
That's interesting.
And my feeling is actually it's going to make us worse. I think that didn't win in his poll, but anyway. The lesson for next time, were we inclined to learn lessons anymore, would be you take every opportunity to limit these things, right? And you use them for their value to the extent that you can make some people less sick with with a drug, for example, even if they are sick and still transmit it.
Right.
Less sick is less sick to the extent, the lockdown thing, it's just so clear to me. It would have been harder to sell people on a lockdown that really kept you away from other people early on because it's more extreme. But at the very least, now that we've had endless lockdown and everybody has grown so fatigued of it, we ought to understand, the wisdom ought to be, wow, I would prefer if you could teleport me back to the beginning of this. I'll take the 6 weeks. I really will. I'll take the 6 weeks gladly.
Yeah.
In order not to be here.
And six weeks of isolation and loss of economic activity seemed impossible back in March. And now we're looking at 9 months and more and more and more and more.
Yep.
And, some places have gone well out of lockdown. Here in Portland, we've been in some sort of either a hard or a soft lockdown the entire time.
Yep.
Nothing, things have never gone back to normal since mid-March.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let me get through 2 more here, and then actually 3 more here because one of them is just a comment, and then we'll move to next hours. UK Minister Liz Truss gave a speech at the Center for Policy Studies. Wow, that's not studies. That's not a word. Studies? No. I'll try again. UK Minister Liz Truss gave a speech at the Center for Policy Studies that equality should be based on facts, not fashion. She even talked about Foucault. Again, the UK Kemi Badenoch, don't know, is openly critical on CRT. There is hope. Thanks. That's just a comment, but always good to hear. And it does feel like in some regards, especially, it's just the part that I'm most highly attuned to is the sex-based differences and the inroads that trans rights activists are making to sex-based differences in the law. That the UK is well ahead of the US and Canada on this. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but whatever you guys are doing over there, please export it. Please bring it over here. Okay, what's the evolutionary advantage of the human's female menstrual cycle being so similar on average to the lunar cycle? I postulate the hunter-gatherers hunted when the moon is full, but spent the darkest nights making babies.
I'm not sure what we should do with this. There is, I believe, a very compelling hypothesis. Is this the place for it?
Sorry, I gave you nothing.
Yeah.
With that,
let's just say I believe.
Maybe not. Well, I will say that I don't think that hunting when the moon is full and spending the darkest nights making babies is going to be the answer, because we are precisely not typically linked up like that. That even within populations, and there have been, for a long time it was thought, women, in all female dorms and such, end up having menses together, and it turns out that's much less true than early evidence suggested. So specifically, one of the reasons that we are as little sexually dimorphic as we are, and that we are as much tending to monogamy as we are as humans, as compared to, say, chimps or bonobos, our closest extant relatives, is precisely because we don't have a monopolizable timing on reproduction.
Yep.
That all women are not actually getting pregnant at the same moment in like a lunar cycle. So I think that the second part of that is not going to be right.
Right. So here's what I will say. I will give you a teaser, and
Yeah.
I understand that there's a debt involved in this that I owe you the explanations that we have held back here. But what I will say is that I believe this has everything to do with the moon, that it is the moon. It is not the moon's gravity affecting women as it does tides or any of the other foolishness that's been suggested on this front, but that this is not an accident, and there is something very special about the moon, and that it shows up in all kinds of places that you don't expect, not all of them having to do with reproduction. So anyway, yes, think about the moon and its phase timing and things like that, and we will revisit this sooner rather than later.
Awesome. Just a book recommendation for game theory. Prisoner's Dilemma by William Poundstone, part von Neumann biography, part game theory overview, part Cold War history. So that sounds like potentially exactly the kind of thing we've been looking for. Thank you for that recommendation. Again, it's called Prisoner's Dilemma by William Poundstone. And I'm going to switch.
You're going to highlight that?
Yeah, I just did. I'm going to switch now, but there's a question here from someone who says, I'm a lesbian who's never conformed to sex stereotypes, and I'm curious what makes real trans. I promise we will return to that one in episode 60. Now I need to find this hour's questions. Did you draw a line here, Zack?
Yes.
There it is. All right. Woke-ism is so infectious because it fills the religion-shaped hole in people's lives. True.
Mm-hmm.
What if,
I like that way of putting it, actually. So
the question, can I just read the rest of the
Sure.
question first? What if the best way to prevail over it is to come up with a new religion-shaped thing? Can you think of some tenets to base it on?
Again, I think you've nailed the phenomenon exactly, right? It's the religion-shaped hole. And the problem is people who notice that there is a religion-shaped hole in general in people when they lack a religion often come up with the idea that we need to create one, which we don't. But the idea that one has to come up with something that conforms to those constraints is probably right.
Well, and I like the framing too in the second part of the question, a religion-shaped thing.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's exactly the right idea. Right.
Yeah.
So in some sense, and we advocate for something like this in our book, not with respect to religion, but the idea that there are certain human needs that exist as that they are wired into us in a way that we cannot just simply wish them away, even if we wanted to, right? Jealousy is actually a good example of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jealousy is deeply built in, and the wisest people in the polyamorous community recognize that working around that thing is a huge struggle, and we can debate whether or not it's worth it, but the point is you can't wish away the jealousy just because it doesn't make any sense in 2020 maybe.
Or because you find it unfair.
Right. It's there. So the question is, how can you work around the constraint? And there are lots of places where this is what we have to do. We have to recognize what kind of animal we are. We may be living in novel circumstances where that thing that we once were is a bad match, but you have to, Jim Rutt is fond of saying that no system predicated on a new man is viable, right?
Yeah.
That there are lots of people who want to rebuild humans so that they can live in some better way. And the point is, now, anytime you do that, you've just told us you don't know how to build the system. So
no, and that's the other place where that shows up in a more common form for probably everyone has heard, like when you're getting into a relationship with someone, if what you imagine, if you really like them, except they really need to change in order to conform to anything you're going to be able to live with. Like, no, it's not that people can't change, but if having functionality requires that change will happen in some way that you have in your head, you can't expect that it will be functional.
Yeah.
And so just to say, Jim Rutt, who many viewers, in this case just viewers, will be familiar with, but he, along with Jordan Hall, who we earlier had a question that included, and you were sort of a substantial part of the Game B group that was talking about things like Jubilee as possible responses to.
Right. So we were talking about how to build a system that would replace this one, would preserve its values and not suffer its harms and unintended consequences. And so we spend a lot of time, and basically the ability to say, look, anything that depends on us being different than we are is not worth talking about, right? We are what we are, and then you have to build a system that works for that. So yes, the religion-shaped hole is the point. So well done.
Yeah. Bah humbug, the next one says. Yeah. This one, Bret, should I read it?
Sure.
Okay. Sam Harris recently said he was no longer in the IDW. Could it be because of your remarks about his Trump derangement syndrome? Seems very childish either way. What's going on with Sam? Is it time for a Bret-Sam conversation?
Let's be careful here. I do think he was responding to our comments. And I also think that I owe him an apology. I think he probably thinks I owe him an apology. I don't think I owe him the apology for the thing he thinks it's for. But anyway, I would be very interested in having that conversation with him. And frankly, I think there's a very good reason to do it, which is that to the extent that we find ourselves on two different sides of something, how to understand Trump and the Trump era, it's a pretty good mirror for a civilization-wide wound, a tear in the fabric of our collective sense of ourselves. And so basically, I think I screwed up, but I also think that I don't think I screwed up ununderstandably. And the ability to figure out what one does, having been in that situation, is, I think, a model for lots of people who are going to find themselves confronted with people in their lives that they no longer know how to interact with on the basis of stuff that went down during 2020 as we tried to figure out what to think of the election and Trump and all that. So anyway, Sam, if you're out there, I would certainly welcome it. And I think it could be useful for more than just us.
Hey, what are the skulls and moth behind you guys?
Well,
there's a moth.
Yeah.
It's a butterfly.
Well, this is a lepidopteran. Let's put it at that. The skulls, we have a bear and another bear, this one being also a seal. And the moth is a sculpture from
an artist on Salt Spring Island. Which is here in the U.S. we refer to them as the Canadian San Juans. In Canada, they actually call them the Gulf Islands.
Mm-hmm. So this is
off the coast of British Columbia in the Strait of San Juan de Fuca-ish, between Vancouver Island and Vancouver City.
Between Vancouver Island and the mainland.
Between Vancouver and Vancouver.
Right, exactly. Anyway, very gifted, interesting artist who works in metal and glass. And anyway, if you're up on Salt Spring Island,
we have a few of these.
Can't be too hard to find.
Yeah. Two bears, one of which is a seal.
Yeah, two bears, one of which is a seal. Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like English to many people, I'm sure, but it is.
Owen Gilbert's natural reward drives the advancement of life. Is that similar to explorer mode? And there's a link.
Natural reward drives the advancement of life. Well, that sounds more like selection to me. Explorer modes is, to give the short version, explorer modes is the idea that if finding adaptations is good, which it clearly is in evolutionary terms, then one of the adaptations that is surely likely to be discovered is a way of accelerating the process of adaptation, and therefore exploring space in a deliberate, when I say space, I mean design space, exploring design space in a deliberate way rather than a haphazard random way. Anyway, it's another one of those concepts that I really want to spell out in rigorous detail, because I think it is worthy of scrutiny and challenge, and I think it will triumph if properly viewed, but we haven't gotten there yet. So far, what we've gotten is an informal description, which has caused a number of people to get their knickers in a twist.
How should someone who is recovered from COVID handle the calculation between the uncertainty of lasting natural immunity versus the risks of a vaccine?
Wait, this was about someone who has recovered from
Yeah.
COVID?
If it were me, I would not try to be first, second, or third in line for the vaccine. I mean, it depends on how forward-facing your work is.
Yeah, I got to say, I don't understand why we haven't had this conversation. Should people who have had COVID be getting this at all?
Well, that's so presumably, and I actually don't remember what's in that New England Journal of Medicine paper with the 40,000+ volunteers. None of them, I think that they made sure that they were looking at naive participants who had not been exposed, who had not tested positive for COVID. So I think the answer to this is, at least so far as I know, we have no idea what the vaccine might do if you've already had it. Is it, exactly as safe, which is to say hopefully very safe and maybe not, but much less effective because it's only building on natural immunity you already have? Is it really hardly effective at all because you've already got all the efficacy that your immune system is going to have because you've already been exposed? Both of those are possibilities.
Well, let's put it this way. What we do think we know is that at least on this time scale, very few people get COVID twice.
Yeah.
So if that's the case,
Yeah.
and the dangers here exist by virtue of the fact that we don't know what happens, never mind whether it has a different, not never mind, but it's a secondary layer of consideration, whether there's some effect that comes to people who've had COVID because their immune systems aren't naive and will look at the vaccine differently. That's a likely thing.
Yeah.
But before you ever get there, the good of giving people who've already had COVID this vaccine is pretty small as long as their immunity from COVID lasts. And so we shouldn't be experimenting on anybody when A, there's not enough vaccine to go around, and B, we don't have any idea what the hazards are. At the very least, we've got a large number of people who've had COVID, and they shouldn't need this. So, and then, this gets right to the question, which is, there is going to be some kind of draconian, you're not allowed to do these things, whether it's air travel or go to a concert or whatever, unless you can establish that you've had this vaccine. And is that the reason that we're going to expose people who have had COVID to a vaccine that, as far as we know, they don't need and might never need?
In order to come out of lockdown?
In order to make sure that everybody has some card that says they've been vaccinated. This is insane. So we should absolutely, and if we had been slower on the testing front, we would have tested against different groups. There were a lot of people who were excluded apparently from this study. It wasn't that big a study. And in order to be able to see the effects, this was very limited who it was given to. And so there's a lot we don't know about how this will interact with other parameters. And there's really no excuse for us seeking to vaccinate everybody, especially a category of people who have effectively been vaccinated by the virus itself.
Yeah. What is the purpose of symptoms like a runny nose when you're little? No, when you're ill. Is it mostly the virus manipulating your body to conquer territory inside and outside the body? To what proportion are symptoms useful to us, i.e. for purging?
So Dick Alexander, my PhD advisor, used to talk about the moment when you stop coughing on behalf of your pathogen and start coughing on your own behalf. The idea being that initially it's triggering you to cough because it gets spread by your doing so. And at some point you are coughing to get rid of, mucus that has to do with dead cells and other particles.
It's so brilliant. And this is, this is again the problem with categories, which we need. But in 2020, everyone is scared of the person who's coughing. And some coughs, there's no reason for you to be scared of. You don't want to be in their physical space. Like, no one wants to be coughed on. But part of that is just because it's hard to tell the difference between an infectious cough and I'm trying to clear myself of this thing, but it's all dead and I'm not infectious anymore cough.
Yep, totally. So your question is a good one. I think the runny nose has a lot to do with spreading stuff. Because, if you think about it, also, we have the benefit in so many different ways of, running water and soap that, just happens to be distributed around the landscape all over the place.
Yeah.
But imagine yourself sick with, whatever, the flu, a cold or whatever, and having no access to running water, or having it only in a river where you have to be over there, right? You're constantly like, you're dripping and you're snot rocketing and it's all over you, right? And at some point, the particles are dead. They've been out in the world long enough that they're not viable anymore. But the point is, you're kind of an active spreader of this stuff until you're not sick anymore. So yes, anything that triggers a symptom that causes spread is obviously going to be favored. And, we have extraordinary examples of this in other realms, like rabies, causes you to froth at the mouth and be angry enough to bite just about anyone. And, it just so happens that it's transmitted by a frothy mouth bite. Or cordyceps fungus that causes
yes, that's where I was going to go. Yep.
Insects to climb a blade of grass before,
or a tree, or a canopy tree.
Something. I think there's one that they climb a blade of grass and they grip it with their
mandibles.
What's the other term for them?
Chelicerae, if they're spiders. No.
Can't remember it.
Okay.
But anyway, they grip before they die and sprout fruiting bodies. So they're there when a sheep comes along and. I'm mixing two things.
I think you are, because I have found sheep to be vanishingly rare in the rainforest, where cordyceps tend to be.
That's true. That's true. But anyway, I think there are two things going on. There's one creature with a 2-part life cycle that puts itself in the path of a grazer, and then there's another one, which is cordyceps, which just goes to a high place. And
At cordyceps, that genus, it's like there's like hundreds, and many of them, maybe the vast majority of the cordyceps fungi are specialized for a particular host. So you got like cicada hosts and grasshopper hosts, and of course cicada isn't one thing and grasshopper isn't one thing. So highly specialized, but they cause behavior in the host that enhances transmission of the pathogen.
Absolutely. And this reminds me, last time you and I were in the Amazon,
which was this year,
which wild.
I can only say that for another 2 weeks, so I'm just going to keep saying it.
We encountered a very nice corpse of a cordyceps infected.
Not a phrase you hear very often.
No,
it was a very nice corpse.
It was a very nice corpse of a cordyceps infected insect, and I don't remember how successful I was at photographing it. I think I did all right. But anyway, it reminds me that
we were there, right? Oh, you were just going to say, yes.
We should do an episode where we look at the photographs that we have brought back and talk about what's out there and what it's like to go looking for it and all those things.
Yes.
We should definitely do it.
100%. Good. Being so self-aware, or are you philosophical zombies? How do you two consistently stoke the flames of romance? Can relationships transcend their evolutionary biological origins and contain meaning beyond being mere strategies of Darwinian evolution? Also, #free Little Wayne.
Totally. Interesting question. Look, you are adaptively wired to want what is good for you. And the fact that nobody else could tolerate me means that it makes perfect sense for me to find you unendingly.
Wow. That's a terrible thing to say.
No, you're taking it the wrong way.
Okay.
I'm just saying things are very clear from my perspective. I don't know what keeps you going, but am I making this worse?
Yes, very much so. Thanks, dude. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. I don't know what to say.
No, I don't know what to say either.
I think I do know what to say.
But, can relation... Go on.
It's a never-ending adventure, and I will speak for myself, though I have a feeling I'm partially speaking for you here too, which is that having been on an adventure since we were,
20?
Yeah, not quite 20, means that there's a whole huge history and storehouse of stuff that we share. In some sense, we partially grew up together, and
we've known each other since we were 16.
Yep, and have been together since we were very young, and that means that there's an awful lot of stuff there, which I don't know, makes stuff awesome.
But if you believe sitcoms, if you take the sitcom model of monogamy, then that should just mean that we're even more tired of each other and bored and haven't had any fun since 1990 or something. No, that was the year we got together ish, 89, something like that.
Yep.
Anyway, but that's not right. And so, being able to actually adventure together, be that in geographic space or psychonaut space or physical space or any number of things.
Yep.
And not being able to predict with exact accuracy and precision what the next day, week, month, year is going to look like is amazing, and it is part of what makes lockdown hard for everyone.
Yeah,
absolutely everyone, is that things have become so predictable in so many ways that it's harder to remember what is exciting and serendipitous about life.
Yes. In fact, I was talking to a friend quite recently about how terrible, frankly, lockdown is, and on so many different levels, all of the ways in which it's socially corrosive of just all the most normal stuff. And I was, I was reminded of a thought that keeps occurring to me, which is how lucky we are to be locked down in this way. I mean, we're fortunate.
We are. Yeah. The four of us, the 8 of us who live in this house together, including 4 humans and 4 carnivorans.
Yeah. It totally sucks. But if you have to be locked down, being, locked down with people you like being with and who challenge you all the time and who know you well enough to say, you need to go get on your bike.
I don't care if it's midnight and raining. Just do it.
Get on your bike. Anyway, I do feel super lucky. And I also think, figure out what makes you feel super lucky and then pursue that no matter what.
Yeah, good. Following right up on that one, why do the butts of bees and other insects always shake? Do they? I think apis, honeybees, do a waggle dance in which they intentionally shake their butts, but it conveys meaning.
And you don't see it because it's in the hive.
Yeah, we don't see it. Well,
we don't see it.
No, there's one part. So there's like 3
there's
different.
One on the porch.
Yeah, there's like 3 different things that are being conveyed. And I don't remember which is which. But 2 of them happen in the hive, and then once the bee gets the attention of some of her hive mates, she comes out and does one last thing. So there's like direction, distance, and what's the third? I don't know.
Oh, it's angle. It's angle.
Well, so that's direction.
Direction.
So there's
height. Which
is it height? Okay, so
height,
it's like a 2D
angle,
vector,
height,
and
angle,
then
and distance. Yeah.
So I think distance may be conveyed outside. I don't remember. I don't know. But one of them is, and we could see them do that. But I don't know. Do other insects typically shake their butt? I mean, they are. Some of them actually are releasing pheromones. There's a butt releasing move that involves pheromone release.
There's butt releasing move or wiggling move that does that.
Yeah,
there's a heat releasing stuff. There's fluttering on the surface of the hive. Where there's actual thermoregulation of the hive. But I think this person is talking about the isolated bee that you encounter out in the world. And it's interesting. There's bound to be an explanation. It may have something to do with. I want to be very careful I don't make an error, but I'm wondering if it could have a respiratory component.
Boy, it's possible.
So in general, they're going to be breathing through spiracles
that are all over.
Yeah.
But I don't know insect A&P well enough.
Yeah.
To say.
All right, maybe we'll look into this one, but there's there are a number of possible answers. One is communication of something like, "Hey, there's a bee here. Don't a signal to grazers that you don't want to eat this leaf because you'll get stung." This is an animal that's advertising its presence, so that could work. Could be a respiratory thing. It could be a orientation thing. The way birds bob their heads, that's effectively holding something steady as they move.
Yeah.
I don't think that's likely here, but that kind of movement is there. Anyway, there are a number of possibilities. I wish I knew the answer, but maybe
mantids sort of seem to do that sometimes. Like they'll be totally still,
yes.
and then they.
I think they do that.
Yeah.
I think they do that. You're right. And chameleons, obviously.
Not insects.
Quite true. Quite true. I actually knew that.
I believe you did. Yes. Yep. DNA replication is costly, so why do differentiated somatic cells retain a full genome? Why not only keep the genes they need and ditch silenced genes? It's a great question.
It's a marvelous question.
I mean, you could also
I got a slam dunk
Okay,
answer.
do
I
it.
don't know
Do
if
it.
it's
I
right.
got little bits and pieces, but go for it.
What I would say is the genome is not filed in a way that makes that simple. So you're talking about a huge amount of editing, and that editing is liable to be error prone. So you're talking about potentially a huge, in fact, this is a good connection. So long ago, as I was studying telomeres and senescence, my co-author and I were looking into the question of Hutchison-Gilford's progeria, which is this phenomenon that makes little children, often boys, very old physiologically early in life. And there was a question back then in the 90s about whether or not this was a real old age or it just sort of seemed like it. Turns out it's real old age. They have almost every pathology of old age with two interesting and important exceptions. One of them being they don't get
Is that
cancer.
going to be?
Yep.
You want
You want to show that? So here's a young boy, has the classic facial features. Actually, can you show this one here? Here are three sufferers. So anyway, the two pathologies that these kids don't get, they don't live very long. They don't get cancer and they don't have mental decline, right? They have the mind of a child and they don't get dementia and they don't get cancer. And so those two things are conspicuous, and we can talk about why that would be another time. It has to do with the fact that the brain doesn't age the same way as every other tissue. That's one thing. And those of you who think that we're going to defeat aging and live forever, even if you figured it out for the body, which you won't, you'd have to figure it out for the mind too, and you won't. So there's that. But why was I on this topic? Oh, yeah, the editing. So here's the thing. So I predicted in that paper that it would turn out that people with Hutchison-Gilford's progeria had short telomeres, which did not turn out to be the case. The prediction was wrong, but it was wrong in an interesting way. The answer turned out to be something I didn't think to predict because I didn't know about it, right? So in the same, just like the callitrichids with the twinning thing, it was like this case where, I didn't predict the right thing, but it's the exception that proves the rule kind of thing, which was the cells of kids with Hutchison-Gilford's progeria don't stick. And so I think that,
don't stick?
Yeah,
what do you mean don't stick?
They die. They have to make a number of copies of a cell before they get one that lasts. So they basically going through a lifetime's worth of cellular reproduction very, very quickly.
They don't persist. They don't survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so their bodies go through all of these pathologies because this is, of course, what happens to all of us over a very long period of time, is that you run out of, your cells age to a point that they need to be replaced. And at some point, your ability to replace them is expended because you have a limit, because you're avoiding cancer your whole life. So anyway, the point is, were you to build a system where you had to edit out the part of the genome that wasn't necessary in all of those other cells, it would have to be really, really good at getting exactly the right fraction of the genome. And if it didn't, then it would end up screwing up a bunch of cells where you've edited out something that they need, which would require you to have more cellular turnover. And so the point is not worth it. Now, there are cells that we remove genomes from entirely. Red blood cells in mammals are enucleated. The story is to make more room for hemoglobin so that they're better at transporting oxygen. I don't know if that story is right. I know that it's not true in birds, and so it's suspect because birds have even greater requirements, at least flying birds.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many converged, weird, complex characters between mammals and birds, and that is not one of them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Endothermy, four-chambered heart.
Yeah.
So so many things that have to do with running hot and fast, but not enucleated red blood cells.
Yep.
Huh. I actually never put
running
that together.
Hot and fast and put away wet.
Some birds get put away wet.
Away wet. Yes. But here's the thing. All right. Love your question. And here's what I'm going to argue. That you have happened onto a case where the answer is phylogenetic constraint. Right? There are lots of things about the design of any creature that cannot be made better, not because the better design isn't obvious and doesn't exist in some other creature, but because getting there is impossibly complex and difficult and or dangerous, right? So For example, the optic nerve. Our optic nerve comes through the front of our eye, which causes a blind spot. Cephalopods have it in the back of their eye, which solves the problem. So the design is possible, but you can't get there because the pathway to reverse the eye goes through blindness, presumably, and so we don't do it. But in this case, I think the point would be, how much better off would you be if your genome was organized in such a way that all of the stuff ups, in some direction, some physical direction from that point in development was no longer necessary and could be edited off, right? Now, so you can't redesign the genome around some Dewey Decimal System that would make everything logically oriented relative to each other. You're stuck with the genome that you've inherited, which is chaotic in the way you've gotten it. That sort of thing. And then the one last thing I would say is, it is also the case that because genes tend to have more than one useful configuration arrived at by editing, so a gene may have something like 5 different versions that get produced. The point is, a gene that is no longer useful in version A may be still useful for version C and D.
I think this is going to be a big part of the answer, that alternative splicing of genes into totally different forms that code for very different outcomes is one form of molecular epigenetics, what we would say epigenetics sensu stricto, like the narrow sense of epigenetics, which has come to become the dominant way that people think of it when they say it, which is say, how is it that a genome with only, God, what do we think at this point, like 80, 100,000 genes?
I think it's like 20,000 with 5 edits on average per.
Even less, yeah. Can make something of this much complexity. It's going to be in things like methylation of histone proteins and alternative splicing. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, but it's basically different ways of making the base stuff code for a lot of different things. This Mendelian idea of, you have a gene for wrinkledness on peas and color of peas and all of this, like he got really lucky with the particular plant he was looking at and the particular characters that showed up as very simple, what have become known as now as Mendelian traits. But almost certainly those same things that he was selecting for to get smooth versus wrinkled peas, etc., were also changing other aspects of the plant. Just like we see with like dog breeds, when you select for something, you end up with something else that you weren't intending.
Yeah.
Bret, what are we at, Zack?
We're at an hour and about 17.
Okay, let's go to the end of the page here.
Okay.
Or my page. I think there's more beyond it, but Bret, I think you have circumcision wrong, and I'd recommend you listen to Majid Nawaz on this. He had done it to his first son, but is allowing his second son to grow up and be free to decide for himself.
Yeah, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, we actually talked about this with Majid when we saw him in London
We
2
did.
years ago.
Yeah, no, that was in May of 2019, or June or May. Yeah, yes.
It was definitely in the past.
It was in May of 2019.
Yep. So anyway, look.
Had a wonderful, wonderful dinner with him.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Marvelous. Here's the problem. You got to take the 2 parts of the story that go together that tell you just how complex this is likely to be, right? The foreskin passes the test of adaptation. It's clearly adaptive. The process of removing the foreskin also passes the test for adaptation, right? What that tells us is that the foreskin is serving a purpose and that its removal is serving a purpose. And this is a Chesterton's fence problem, right? We don't know what the purpose is exactly. And there is mixed evidence, or worse, about immunity to pathogens. It's quite possible that in modern circumstances, the removal is not necessary. It is possible that it is serving a purpose that we would regard as immoral. It's possible that it is still serving a purpose and we just don't know it. And so the point is, I don't think it's a question of wrong, right? To the extent that your argument is the foreskin is a natural part of the body and therefore removing it is wrong, you have not understood that its removal worked. We don't know what it worked to do. right? And so there is no wrong here. There is a recognition of what we do not know. And to the extent that anyone says we know enough to say, it is wrong to circumcise, I don't think they do know enough, or maybe I'm just not up to date and they've discovered it in the last year. But short of that, the point is it's not clear. This is an open question, and I believe we should know more. On the other hand, what I will say is the belief that this is a disaster for civilization akin to FGM, no, it's not a disaster, right? This is a judgment call based on what we do not know and based on some interaction between Chesterton's fence and the precautionary principle. And in light of that, I just don't think, I think the vitriol around this is completely wrong-headed.
Given your interest in philosophy of science, where do you come down on scientific realism, anti-realism, structural realism, etc.? I don't know exactly what those are referring to. So there's just so much languaging around the various ways of thinking about science, and I don't know exactly what these are referring to.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of have the sense that there is reality, that we're a little bit hamstrung figuring out how it works, that science is the best tool you've got, that you've got to be very careful about how you deploy it, because it's easy to do science wrong and to look like you're doing it right. And which one of those is that?
Right. Right. I retract my Unity vote after Crenshaw did that skydiving vid. LOL. I don't know about this. You do some skydiving video? Know about this?
Oh. We're talking about Dan Crenshaw, presumably. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that there is a sky. There must be. I guess I have to look it up. Here's the thing, though. The election is over.
Thank God.
So I don't know. I don't know that you need to retract any vote. We're just.
It ends LOL. Okay, this, God, it's a weird question to end on. Maybe I'll find another one. How do I find myself a girlfriend or wife like Heather? Serious question. Thank you, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh. If I knew the answer to that.
That's all you're going to say?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to put it in these terms, but if I knew the answer to that, I'd be extremely rich, because I would, or something, I would have to, fear people hunting me down and extract the answer. But fortunately, it's not that kind of question.
I mean, one thing that we have said in the past with regard to finding your would-be soulmate, whether or not you like that languaging, is looking for someone, and this just given sex differences will be more difficult to find in a woman than in a man. Someone who engages in things that provide them physical feedback from the physical universe. And one really good way to find such a person is to go outside. And so, be looking, either, all bets are off with COVID and lockdowns and such, but, go join organizations that go on, group hikes or backpacks or, or biking or any sort of thing like that, or taking classes that involve, again, physical feedback in the universe, such that someone who lives an entirely social life, who can negotiate what an outcome means and thus change forever after the history that is written about it, is going to be a much harder person to deal with.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think, in some sense, if I may now take a serious crack at the question, in part, I think we just have very wrong expectations about finding a mate. And the idea, there's this thing that one does playing video games, or I don't know what modern video games are like, but back when I used to play video games, there was this temptation.
It was Pong.
What? I did play Pong, but no, I played some that were more sophisticated than that. But
yes.
But anyway, there's a temptation as you start a video game and something gets by you and your score drops. To reset,
mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you're trying to get a high score, it doesn't make sense to invest in a game where you're already starting out behind, right? And so there's a sort of sense that, and even the mythology around romance is all about finding the one, right? Yeah. No, it's not really about finding the one. It's about finding somebody whose properties are such that they will develop into what you're looking for. And, I think in our case, I used to be embarrassed about us having gotten together so early because there's this kind of implication that that's a sad story, right? That, you didn't encounter other people. And I quite think the opposite now.
Well, we both did.
Yeah.
We didn't get together in high school.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's true, but we got together early.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, if you're looking late in life, if you're going to get through your 30s and then you're going to find somebody, right? You're finding somebody who's already, they are mostly what they're going to be, rather than developing together and having influence on each other, which I think has been very positive. So anyway, I don't know, something. Opt out of whatever garbage is going on out there with somebody who has the right foundation.
So one more, just a comment. This is a holiday bonus for Zack. I think I speak for many listeners when I say we are so impressed and grateful for your producer skills over 59 episodes. Thank you to the whole family for modeling a great family business. Awesome. Yeah. Zack's a rock star. He's doing fantastic work.
Very much a keeper.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. I think we've done it.
I think we've done it. So yeah, all the usual stuff that we can say, if I can find my notes. Yep, you can go to, as Zack's outro doesn't say anymore. It's not working.
Oh my God.
www.store.darkhorsepodcast.org. Use code Christmas, all caps, to get 10% off through Christmas. Join either of our Patreons right now. The 48-hour period is open to ask questions on mine at the $11 and up level for the private Q&A that we have on the last Sunday of every month. Bret's going to have a bonus conversation for people at his Patreon at $100 a month and up level next
Coalition
Saturday.
of the Reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And does every month, usually the first Saturday and Sunday for the other group of the month. Also, at our Patreons, you can find the Discord server. You can go to the Clips channel, all that. Have a great Christmas. Hope you had a great Hanukkah. Lovely solstice. Pagan rituals for everyone. Try to stay whole and happy and get outside almost no matter how bad the weather is, and that'll help.
Yeah, and if you can, do something. Watch the sunset on the solstice. Something to just mark that point. It really is, it's the point of hitting bottom and heading back up.
Yeah.
Slowly at first, but anyway, we're headed in the right direction. And here's the thing. Today, we can say winter is coming. Next time, it will be spring that is coming. All right. Be well, everyone.